Doreen Granpeesheh is the
Dr. Doreen is an expert in autism.
Doreen Granpeesheh.
Dr. Granpeesheh.
Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh.
Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh is a visionary in the field of autism. Now you can ask her questions on Ask Dr. Doreen. Would love some help with eating good stuff instead of bagels and junk stuff. Very common tale that our kids get fixated on a type of food or, you know, one or two things.
That's right.
And that's what they want to eat. Very,
in fact,
very
if
typical.
you go further and read what Lori just wrote, I think we can answer both at the same time.
Okay, do you want to read that or you want me to?
Sure. Lori says, my son only eats pizza, chicken nuggets, cheeseburgers, Cheez-Its, fruit, peanut butter, and jelly and cheese. This is really it. We try and give him different foods. We even hide it in foods. He just won't eat it. He has sensory issues and is starting a feeding therapist. The problem I have is that I'm about ready to give up cooking. I waste so much food and my leftovers go in the trash. It's hard to make meals for just 2 people when only I eat. How can I get him to explore more foods? He also helps cook the meals in the kitchen and he loves this a lot, but when he has to eat it, he doesn't. And it's great that you wrote in, Lori, because I think it's important for us to realize that our kids become selective for different reasons. And as we go to teaching them to become unselective, we have to keep those reasons in mind. In this particular case, it sounds like your child has some issues with the actual texture of the food, perhaps. I'm not sure, because pizza, chicken nuggets have a very different texture than, let's say, peanut butter or jelly, right? So it could potentially be texture. I've had a lot of kids where parents will come in and say he only likes crunchy foods, like chips, for instance, or crackers. And other times parents will say, oh no, he won't chew. He will only eat things that are mushy.
Yeah.
Okay. So texture definitely is part of it. On the other hand, I find it very, very common that our kids will crave those particular foods that it's not really an allergic reaction, but it is similar to an allergic reaction. They crave the foods that they actually should not be eating. And that is because when we eat foods that we can't, so normally we eat foods, we digest them, right? The process of digestion, we break the food down into peptides, which are chains of amino acids. And then we break it further down into the amino acid. And the amino acid is what travels through the bloodstream and gives nutrition to all parts of our body and our brain. Unfortunately, there are certain foods that our kids just don't break down all the way to the amino acid level. They break it down partially to the peptide level, and then these peptides start to travel, and this is where the leaky gut theory and all of the research and science behind that comes in. Those peptides will actually cause the reaction that is kind of like an endorphin reaction. So it's sort of, when you see our kids eating those particular foods, they get a little high from it. Similar to, like, let's say when we drink alcohol in some ways, right? So what happens is obviously they crave it. They will go after that feeling more, and they will continue to eat those specific foods. So that's another common kind of thing that happens that makes our kids very, very picky. Now, another thing that happens, I think, is that sometimes our kids will eat something that makes them feel sick, right? Like bloated, because they really can't digest it. And in those cases, our kids will start to not only avoid that particular type of food, but everything that in some way they associate as being in the same category. I mean, as adults, we classify our foods, like we'll say, oh, you know, these are legumes and those are dairy and stuff like that. But kids don't know those classes, so they will classify them in their mind different ways. Like, oh, anything that is white, or anything, you know, last time I had a stomachache, it was because I ate things that were brown, so I'm not going to eat those things anymore. So all of those types of factors come into play when our kids become very selective, right? And when you're reversing it, it is a process, it's a very delicate process where you have to actually keep all of that in mind. For instance, if I am doing feeding therapy, which I'll briefly talk about in a minute, but if I'm doing feeding therapy and it's with a child who is very texture resistant, I'm going to focus first on getting the child to actually eat things that are within the classification of textures they like. And then I will, at the end, once they've started to broaden, then I will start to introduce new textures.
Yeah.
And it's it's a process, right, Shannon? As you know, you can't just, a lot of parents think that the key is to hide the food in other food. Yeah. But in reality, it's actually what you're trying to do is you're trying to teach the child to really take in that food. And the only way you're going to do this, because remember, food in itself is a primary reinforcer. It's a very, very potent thing, right? Food aversion is one of the most effective long-term types of aversion. So it takes a little while to reverse that. And the way that you do it is you start with a very, very small morsel of the food that the child will not take in, and you then reward with the food that the child wants, okay? And you can also reward with other good things. For instance, every time the child takes a very small portion of the food you're trying to target, you turn on the TV and everybody does a dance, and yes, you give the child their favorite drink or other foods that they like. And then tomorrow you'll do 2 morsels, and every day you will increase by a very, very small amount, meanwhile still maintaining a lot of other reinforcers. Now remember, as the amount of the targeted food gets larger, it becomes impossible to reward with other food, right? Because now you're doubling up on food.
Right.
And your child's going to be full. So that's why it's really important to have other social and secondary types of rewards, right?
Yeah.
Like the TV, as I said, or music, or, token system, or toys, or just, attention from the parent, whatever is meaningful to the child.
Right.
And it's like any other shaping process. It does take a while, but you start with a very, very small request, something that is manageable and is worth it for the child because they're getting all these other rewards, and you gradually increase the demand of the targeted food.
Yeah. I'm wondering if everybody has seen the documentary Super Size Me. Right? Because I always think about that because I think there's a lot of things that we suspected about food that came into sharp focus for me watching that documentary. For those of you who haven't seen it, a very healthy guy who works out decides to do a documentary, and he says, I'm going to, eat
from McDonald's every day.
From the menu every day. And in the beginning, he says, I'm going to have a salad every day. From McDonald's, but everything else, and you see he eats all this wonderful healthy food, and then he decides he's going to eat McDonald's. And the first day that he's eating the McDonald's, come on, it tastes good.
Oh my God, it tastes
right?
amazing.
And he goes, oh, okay, I haven't had a McDonald's hamburger in a while. He's thrilled, wonderful, wonderful. And then the second day he's like, oh, I don't feel so good. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to do this. But then around the 5th day, he's like, oh yeah, and that's all he wants. And by day 27, this guy who was healthy is now with the doctor, and they're saying, you might have done,
has gone up,
you might have done permanent damage to your body just eating McDonald's. But by that point, the thing that's most interesting to me is this guy who 27 days before was eating all this healthy stuff and loving it, he doesn't want to eat anything else now because it becomes this thing where even though his body isn't liking it, it's what he now is craving.
Right.
And he wants that stuff. And I think that's what was most fascinating to me because we don't notice it in our own lives, that if something makes us real sick, we go, oh, I don't know if I can have that. But if it just makes us low grade, not okay, it seems like unthinkable that we would crave that. And yet we do.
Yeah,
not just our kids, we do.
Yeah, we do for sure. And Shannon, we all are in this boat right now.
Oh,
remember,
yes.
like we're not any different from our kids. The only difference is that we have better detoxification cycles, right? We're redoxing from this stuff that we eat all the time. But if you think about it, we hope
yeah.
to some extent, and many of us are not, which is why there's so much chronic illness and so on. But if you think about it, really, we also are, we're taking in all kinds of sugars, preservatives, and these are the things that obviously our body, you have sugar and it'll burn out fast and you'll crave sugar again. And it takes a while for your body to learn how to break down things that are not, immediate things like sugar, for instance. And it takes a while, right? So you have to train your body. I would say it takes about a month before your body actually learns that it should break down complex carbs instead of having the simple carbs all the time. So these diets are very important. I noticed what Parker wrote. He is right. It is difficult to do this because initially sometimes our kids will refuse. And let me tell you, no child will starve, but it is possible that they refuse the things that are good for them, like electrolytes, right? And they can become dehydrated. It is really good that if you can use a feeding therapist. Often speech therapists will do feeding. Some BCBAs know how to do feeding. So really it's important for you to get some expertise. My number one, if I was to give you, advice on experts to work with, my number one advice would be to first start with a really good nutritionist. We've worked a lot with Dr. Julie Matthews, who's fantastic. There are lots of really good nutritionists, but you need the nutritionist to establish the diet that you're shooting for, and then you need either a speech path or a behavioral analyst, someone who has experience in feeding, to be able to work with the nutritionist and help your child gradually get to where they are. It's beautiful, though. I want to tell you guys, if any of you have been on a diet where you've lost weight and you've become much more active because now you're eating really healthy foods, you feel good, right? You feel a lot better, you sleep better, etc. And so our kids really do feel better once they start broadening and taking in better foods.
Yes.
If you found anything helpful in this video, please give us a like. In fact, make sure that you smash that subscribe button on YouTube and give us a like on Facebook. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram for important updates. And please download our free podcast wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time. Until then, give your kiddos a hug from me and one for you too. Bye-bye for now.
To subscribe, click here. And if you'd like to check out some more of our videos, click here.
Don't forget, you can watch Ask Dr. Doreen live every Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. Pacific time on autismnetwork.com. We hope to see you there.